and I am a volunteer for the New Knowledge Adventures and AARP, and I've been doing it for quite a while. Today, we are going to have a very interesting topic. It's going to be on what is a bill, how does it go through the legislature, all those types of things, you know. And some of us may wonder how Idaho does it, and do they do it any differently than the federal government? One thing I'd like to say is this class is being recorded. And so that if you find it real valuable, tell your friends and whatever so that they can go to YouTube. And it's just NKA Treasure Valley and YouTube. And it has all the classes that have been taught that the instructors let us record. And a lot of them, I think there's only maybe one or two that they have not wanted us to record it. But remember, next week, we still have classes, one more week. And on Monday, we have one on making sugar skulls. And for the Day of the Dead, there's one that's about tales from the courtroom, and one on digital coupons and how to use those and how much money you can save, and the history of Borough Park. Those are all next week, and you can still sign up for them anytime. So if you haven't signed up before, get for those classes and you want to take them, get ready to sign up for them, okay? Francois Cleveland is, she works for AARP. She is the Associate State Director of Advocacy for AARP, which she's been doing for about 5+ years. And she's the one that looks into issues, policies, laws, those types of things that affect the population of 50 and older. And she works with promoting the policies of AARP and at both the state and the federal level. So we're very happy to welcome her today. If you will put your questions in the chat box, I will direct them to Francois after, whenever she stops talking for a little bit, or, and I can interrupt, or at the end. So it's all yours.
Thank you, Debbie. So I do want to say that I do like to keep things informal. So feel free, Debbie, to interrupt with questions, and we will just take them as they come, because I think it's easier when you build from the knowledge that you have. And if you have a question 3 slides ago, you're still thinking about that question. So we will do that. So today I'm here to talk to you all about the Idaho legislative process. I hope to make it a little bit more interesting than your high school government class, but there will be pop quizzes. So be wary. And if we were in person, I would toss candy to the first person with the right question or the right answer. But since that isn't possible today, we'll have to improvise. And first, if you can, check out your chat feature on your Zoom link in your Zoom area. It should be maybe at the bottom of your screen. It should have like a little bubble coming up with chat underneath it. Hopefully you found that. If you want to put something in chat that says like found it or anything like that, that would be great. If not, you don't have to participate if you don't want to. That's all good. So I'm going to share my screen here for a second, just one moment. And you should all be seeing now my slide presentation.
Yes, we can.
You all can see it. Perfect. I need to find my chat again. It always disappears once I share my screen. So I think you all probably saw that too. Great. So here we are. So I am here to talk about I'm Just a Bill, the Idaho way. So first of all, my first experience as a little girl into the legislative process was Schoolhouse Rock. I don't know about you all. I can still sing the Schoolhouse song. And if it were completely true, we would all ace our high school government class, right? But it It's a very good rendition. We'll listen to a few minutes here, see if you guys recall this, if any of you grew up in somewhere around this time period.
Whew, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee. But I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
All right. So,
Gee, Bill, you
I don't know how many of you have remember that, but as you may know, we're going to play it again. Hang on. Sorry about that. So this is a very kindergarten view of the national sausage making process. That is our national legislative process in Congress. You know, following Schoolhouse Rock on the surface level in Idaho, our process looks very similar to Congress, but in reality, they're very different. In fact, the lawmaking process in every state is very different from each other. The legislatures across the United States have very unique features, and I would argue to say, although they're similar, none are alike. They can differ in length of session, how a bill is introduced, how a bill is amended, and some limit the number of bills that are introduced. The makeup of each body might be different. Legislators in some states are full-time, some are part-time, and the transparency of the process will be different. So bills, what are they? I think a lot of people know a bill is what is turned into statute or law at the end of a session as soon as it goes through the process. But that process can be very complicated. In Idaho, a bill must be introduced in either the House or the Senate. It has to pass both the House and the Senate and be either signed or let go into law by the governor for it to become law. So a bill has a life continuum that starts obviously with ideas. Someone that could be a legislator, a lobbyist, or even an individual can put a pen to paper about what a bill might become. But to become an official member draft, you have to have what's called a purple slip. And that will need to be signed by a legislator and taken to the Legislative Services Office. Or you might hear the term LSO, and I might say that a little bit later, but Legislative Service Office is a division within the legislature. They have a group of attorneys that actually look at each of these ideas and craft it into correct legislation that has the identified appropriate section of Idaho code and make sure that the language of the law is conformed with the rest of Idaho code. So that draft can be passed around to others for opinions. In fact, a lot of the amending of a bill happens here because once it's introduced, it's very hard to change again. So these copies can be held close. So if a member draft is produced, they may show it to a couple friends, a couple stakeholders, but sometimes they don't show it to very many people. And the reason for that is they don't want to build potential opposition to the bill for what they're trying to do, especially if it's something controversial. So in Idaho, the process isn't very transparent in there. And we'll go through a couple more steps that shows that we're really not that great in showing people what's going on in the legislative process. So no matter who had the idea of this bill, the actual legislative member owns that draft and owns that idea until it's actually properly presented in committee. So once a member is okay with the language of the draft, it's converted into an RS or a routing slip. And you'll hear people talk about RS, blah, 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 blah. And people have no idea what that is. And nobody can know what it is because again, it's the confidential property of the legislator. So it's not subject to public records requests. If you know that your local legislator is working on a property tax bill and you want to know what it is, and he has a member draft or he has an RS, you cannot contact Legislative Service Office and with a public records request asking for a copy because it is that property of that legislator. So there are other documents that are considered bills besides your typical bill that might change property taxes or transportation issues, maybe about your local school bus or something like that. There are a couple other types of legislation. There's like your concurrent resolutions. You might hear about that. Those are legislative studies typically. You hear of joint resolutions. There were a lot of joint resolutions our last legislative session that dealt with our mask orders, public health districts, those very controversial issues that they knew that the governor would veto, but they wanted to make a statement by the legislature. So they put those out there as joint resolutions so that it would not go up to the governor. And so they don't have the same force of law. It's like the opinion of the legislature. Then there's also memorials that, if somebody dies, they can do a memorial in honor of somebody. So first pop quiz. Anyone can bring a bill before the legislature. Does anybody want to put in chat the answer, whether they think is true or false? Or you can take yourself off mute and answer the question. Anybody?
I want to say that that's false because that they present it to a legislator who then presents it.
You are correct. Very good, Debbie. And that is right. So a lot of people will say to me, I want to bring a bill to the legislature and have it pass. Well, that's great, but it's not going to happen if you don't have a legislator sponsoring it for you. You cannot bring your own bill before the legislature. So once your bill is RS'd, it goes from that member draft into an RS once the bill or the draft, they pass it around, they look at it, they decide, oh yes, okay, we like the language, we want to put it into an RS. That's kind of, when you've baked something and you've put it together and it's hard to change at this point. So it goes to the committee. Now, most bills never make it out of the committee, out to become statute. They have hundreds of bills that are introduced every year, and very few of them make them all the way to law. So we have RS, now what? So you have to get the chairman of the germane committee to agree to a print hearing. And that's really the first major step, a major hurdle for your bill. So what's that? A print hearing looks at an RS or the routing slip, and honestly, it looks just like the bill, but it has a different number at the top, and that's how you can tell the difference. But there is no public testimony. The bill sponsor, which is usually the legislator will present the bill, and the committee will then look at it to determine whether it is technically correct. If there's any technical errors, they will return the routing slip to the office or to the sponsor, and it dies until the sponsor brings it back, maybe correcting those errors. Once it's publicly presented to the committee, it's now public. So now you can know what that RS bill said. So if it doesn't get any further than the committee, you can go to the committee secretary and ask for a copy of it, and they should be able to provide it for you. If the RS is returned to the sponsor without being formally presented to the committee, nobody will ever see that bill, and nobody can give it to you unless the bill sponsor wants to give it to you. So a lot of other states will have a kind of like a hopper, if you've ever heard that term, where they have to actually pre-file bills with the legislature. So everyone can kind of take a look at them before they go into session. So if you, me, wanted to look through all the bills having to deal with healthcare, we could go through, read them all, kind of have an idea of what's coming before the legislature, and maybe mobilize some support, mobilize some opposition, but really have a good idea of what's coming up that session. In Idaho, you can't do that. There's no pre-filing of bills. You really don't know what's coming before the committee unless you know somebody that told you, until it is properly presented to committee. Now, at the beginning of session, you might have a lot of time to look at that, because once it's printed and you can see it, then you might be another week before that's heard before the committee again. During the end of session, there's a lot of problems with transparency, because it can be introduced, printed, had a community hearing, go up to the floor, go the other side of the rotunda, and go through that process within a day. So beginning of the session, very slow, end of the session, very quick, and you have less public involvement in the end. So once your bill gets a number, and the number it is given in the order of printing. So at the start of a session, and a session is in 2 years, basically. You have the first regular session and the second regular session of a particular legislature. So right now we're in the second regular session. So the first regular session, all the bills in the House will start with number 1, and it'll just continue to count down. On the Senate side, it will start with 1,000 and start counting, not counting down, counting up. So the first bill would be 1,001, second bill 1,002. And then once you get to the end of the first session, go second session, the numbers will continue. It won't start over again, but for those 2-year sessions, all those numbers will run together. So right now we are in the 66th legislature, second session. Now, if the bill is not printed, it will be dead, and the bill sponsor will have to come again with a new RS or give up for the year. So I'll show you what a little committee notice looks like. So this is one for the House Health and Welfare Committee from January. It'll tell you what committee it is. It'll tell you what time the committee is starting. It'll tell you what room number it is. It'll tell you over here, the day. And then over here on this side, you'll see these are RSs. So these were 2 RSs, and I'll tell you who the presenter is. So this here, it was Representative Blanksma. This one was Representative Mitchell. And these committee notices will be published, hopefully 24 hours in advance. But again, the legislature, not particularly transparent. They may make amendments up to 5 minutes before the bill is heard in that committee. It may be taken off the agenda, something might be put on. And then that happens more regularly as you get to the end of session. Now, if these were bill numbers in this area, they would say like H001 for House Bill 1. You could then click on this and it'll actually connect you to the bill. Because these are RSs on the agenda, they will not connect to anything because again, they are private until they're properly presented to the committee. Any questions so far?
I have a question.
Sure.
What about these petitions that, that they have people sign and then they present them, I guess, to the legislators? I don't know who they present them to, but, we voted on one on healthcare a couple years ago, and nothing ever happened with it, even though they had enough signatures. And I know there's a law that they passed, or they tried to pass last year, I'm not sure if it got passed, saying that you could only get a petition that's signed by a percentage of the people that live in that specific area.
Okay,
so
sure.
How do the petitions work?
Okay, so what you're talking about is actually a ballot initiative. So it's different than a petition. So a petition would be something like, we want the legislature to do something about healthcare, let's say, like you said. So you'd sign a petition, they would take it to the legislature of choice, or maybe the committee chair, and say, we've got 2,000 signatures saying that you should pass this bill or do something about healthcare. So that's separate than a ballot initiative, which you would sign a petition there too. And that actually goes onto the ballot. So a couple years ago, there was a ballot initiative on Medicaid expansion, and it actually did pass through your election process. So this is another way that a statute can come to pass outside of the bill hearings and the legislature. So you would have a ballot initiative, and there's strict law about how many signatures you need in order to get something onto the ballot, an initiative onto the ballot. And it has to come from so many counties, and it has to be a certain percentage. And over the years since the Medicaid expansion passed, they've actually tried to change those parameters through the legislature, because it is in statute what those parameters are. but the legislature does not like to have statute made in this way, so they try to make it as hard as possible. Just yesterday or the day before, I believe it was, we got assurances from the Speaker of the House and the Senate Pro Tem, and those are the leaders of both the House and the Senate, that says that they were not going to do any changes to the ballot initiative process in this next legislative session. They just lost in court the one that they passed last year, and they had to pay actually the court fees involved in that when they tried to make it stricter. So that's that process. And so what happened with that? So when Medicaid expansion passed through the ballot initiative, so everyone in the state voted for it. Well, not everyone, but it passed. So the majority of the state voted for it. It actually went into statute. So the legislature was then had the choice the next year. So it's now law, but they had the choice whether or not they wanted to fund it or not. And there was a lot of controversy into the next session about whether or not the Medicaid would be funded fully to fund that Medicaid expansion. And at that point, they did fund it, but there's been a lot of rumblings about the cost of Medicaid expansion and what they should do on this path forward. And they did actually pass a couple of bills that put restrictions onto Medicaid expansion that are actually still, I believe one is still before our CMS looking at whether or not they would allow a exemption into that process for Medicaid, which would require work in order to receive the Medicaid benefits. So that was a long explanation for what you asked, but hopefully that kind of clarifies what the process is for a ballot initiative. So that's where the public can write something, get enough signatures, and have it go through the election process, and a bill which would come only through legislators through the legislative process. Does that make sense?
It does, except that what the part that doesn't make sense is the people voted for it, but the legislators did not fund it. I mean, it's like they said, no, we don't like what you want. And
They did fund Medicaid, but there has been examples where they didn't. So in the past, there was a ballot initiative for term limits. I think that passed in the early 2000s, I believe, and the legislature overrode it. So they have a certain amount that they can use to override a ballot initiative, and they have done that in the past, and they can. And the only recourse that the voter has is to vote those individuals out of office that may have voted against what the public wanted. Any other questions on that? Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about bill hearings. Speaking of very exciting news here. So after a bill's printed, given a number, so maybe we have H1 for our bill number, the bill will go up to the main body, and that will be on the House or the Senate side, where it'll be assigned to committee. And there's another confusing thing. So it goes up there, gets its House bill number. They say, okay, where's it going? You would assume to go back to the same committee. And most times it does, because you usually get it sponsored out of the germane committee, but in not all circumstances will it go back to the same committee. So you always have to kind of watch, okay, so this bill was printed out of one committee, but it may go to another committee in that assignment from the desk on the first reading calendar. And the bill hearings will be noticed like the ones that you have on your screen for health and welfare. So you can kind of follow along there. You can call a committee secretary and ask them if they have an idea when your bill will come up, if there's one that you're really interested in, and they may have an idea, and they may just tell you that they don't know. You can ask to be put on a list. You can also go through the website and sign up for notices about a bill once it's published too. So once that bill is published from the first reading calendar, that's usually the first time you will see the bill as a private citizen. So in that bill hearing, so we've got it printed, it went back to the committee chair, and now it's on the committee agenda. You can sign up to testify. You can do that either in person, or as of last year, you can sign up to testify virtually. This next session remains to be seen how they'll do that. They've made a lot of changes during the pandemic. Whether or not they will continue that, I hope they do. But not sure, because it's all up to the committee chairman what he allows in his committee. If you do testify, everything must be addressed through the chairman, even when answering questions. So if you're up there, you give this beautiful testimony, and it's usually limited to 3 minutes, about, let's say now you're speaking about sidewalks. We had a bill last year where we wanted the sidewalks outside of city limits to be allowed to be continuous from inside city limits for width. So maybe you did this great presentation and you get one of the legislators in the committee asking you questions, you know, okay, why 5.5 feet instead of 6 feet, or the other way around. So when you answer the legislator who might be off to your left, you always have to commit your or give your comments directly to the chair. So you'd say, Mr. Chairman, legislator or representative so-and-so, and then you answer the question. So legislator might ask a question again, and you look at the chairman, and the chairman will recognize you to answer the question. And you again say, Mr. Chairman or Mrs. Chairman, Madam Chairman, whatever you'd like to say, and then Senator so-and-so, or whoever you might be speaking to. So everything is in the control of the chairman. Once the debate is determined to be finished, this could be limited by the chair. It could be voted on the committee. The committee will decide what to do with the bill. And they have several options of what they can do. They can hold it in committee. If they hold it in committee, it's basically dead. That means it's not going to go anywhere. They can vote to send to the floor with a do pass recommendation, or they can send it to the floor without recommendation. So maybe it's a kind of controversial issue and they say it really deserves a full floor vote. So they'll send it up to the floor without recommendation, or they can send the bill to the amending order to change the bill on the floor of the body. Now you may ask, okay, so where's the best place to start my bill? So if you're a new legislator or you're kind of doing some strategic planning of how you want the bill to go, there's a lot of things you need to think about. So are you looking for a momentum? So you want to start on the easier side. Maybe the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee is very in favor of your bill, but the House is a little iffy. If you want to start in the Senate so that it has an easier passage, maybe get some momentum, and then go over to the House side. And maybe by then we'll have, a lot more support in the House because it did so well in the Senate. You can look at it that way. It may be in that same situation, you want to go the House side first because you know that it is a harder burden and you don't want to waste a lot of time in the Senate if it's not going to pass in the House. So you spend a lot of time in the House trying to move your bill forward. And if it passes there, then you can work on that Senate. You may also look at the makeup of the committees. Are you trying to pass something that is not very popular with 3 or 4 of the committee members? You may want to tailor the bill so it might go to a different committee, or you might want to again start on the other side because you know that there's going to be a block there. Funding bills always start in the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee, and they're a little different, and then they don't allow public testimony at all on any of the budget bills. They will have agency experts come in to talk about the bills, but they will not have any public. Tax bills always start in the House Taxation Committee, and near the end of session, you will start to see more bills being presented by the Ways and Means Committee. And that's kind of when things are starting to go really fast to the legislature. Ways and Means is a major committee in that it's a privileged committee where they can introduce bills at any time. Not all committees can do that. All right, well, that was a lot, right? That was just the first step. That was just committee work. A lot of the work in the legislature is in committee. The rest of it is kind of, still work. It's still a lot of process, but a lot of the attention for bills that you would want to pay attention to is what's going on in those committees. So here's our next pop quiz question. A committee chair can kill a bill in their committee. Any bill. Anybody want to wager a thought on whether or not they can do this? You can put it in chat. You can take yourself off mute. Any thoughts? Don't be shy. All right, here we go. It is true. So you'll hear a lot about a committee chairman keeping a bill in his desk. That means he is not producing it at all. So he can do that to any bill. If he doesn't like it, he doesn't think there's a support, and he could be the only one that doesn't like it. His whole committee can want it. The only way that they can get it out of the committee desk is if they have on the floor of the body, the main body, they can request a bill from the committee. Now they do that very rarely because they don't want to take away the power of the chairman. But it is something you'll hear a lot about, especially from either the minority party or maybe a faction of the majority party, about how the chairmen are keeping their bills in the desk and you're not allowing any public testimony on it. That's why, because that chairman is very powerful in what is able to be heard in the committee. So what happens on the floor? So we got their bill, it was introduced, it was RS'd, it was printed, got a bill number, it went to the committee, it was passed through the committee, it got sent up to the floor, and what happens there? First of all, it's important to know that we have a bicameral system. That's two chambers, the House and the Senate. You might think, duh, doesn't everyone? The answer is no, actually. Nebraska does not. Its members are all called senators, and as it was originally had a bicameral legislature, but in 1937 they decided to dissolve their House of Representatives, and they now just have just one body. So things to know about Idaho, we do have that. So an identical bill must be passed by both houses. In some legislatures, a bill will be introduced in both the House and the Senate, and they'll independently work up the both houses. And if they both have the same language, great. If they don't, they go into a reconciliation, and then they go back to their bodies to be voted on again. Then it'll go up to the governor from there. In Idaho, it doesn't quite work that way. There's only one bill. So it'll get introduced in either the House or the Senate. It will work up one side all the way. So let's say it was in the Senate, it was introduced there into committee. It passes committee, it goes to the floor of the Senate. It passes the floor of the Senate. It'll go back down to committee on the other side of the House, and it'll have to be worked up to the other side again. So when you're onto the House floor or the Senate floor, they have what's called reading calendars. You have your first reading calendar, you have your second reading calendar, you have your third reading calendar. What this is a way to make the process a little bit more transparent. So the first reading calendar, they will assign it to the committee. The second reading calendar, they will read it by name and title only, so that you have an idea of what's coming. When it gets to the third reading calendar, that's when it'll be scheduled for a debate on the floor. So they usually take the bills in order on the calendar. So first come, first serve on that reading calendar. But you'll see sometimes that they will vote to hold it in place for one legislative day, 2 legislative days, whatever. And you'll usually see those on more controversial bills, or maybe ones that they're holding for political power. So there's a lot of wrangling between the House and the Senate, saying if you pass this bill, we'll pass that bill. And so when you see things starting to kind of stay at the top of the reading calendar, and that would be the first place in that reading calendar, you'll kind of know that they have maybe some shenanigans going on trying to get that bill or maybe another bill passed. Or maybe they're just trying to come up with consensus on what to do. So the House might have their ideas, the Senate might have their ideas, and they don't necessarily want to pass it until they know, until they kind of agree in both bodies where they want to go. When it's on the floor, there is no testimony by the public. The only people that can testify are legislators. And it's very formal on that floor. When they go to vote, there's a difference between our House and our Senate. Our House is done by pushing a button on their desk, and they will have a green light or a red light. And you might hear members or people saying, to asking their fellow representatives to give their bill a green light. Well, this is what that looks like. So when you have a green light and you want something to pass, this is your name will be up on the reader board in red, in green, saying that you liked it, in red if you didn't like it, and if you're gone for the day, it'll be white. So that's how they keep track of voting in the House. In the Senate, it's all done by roll call. So every vote, they go through the entire list of senators, all 35 of them, and they will each say whether they're voting in favor or against the bill, and they may take 30 seconds to explain their vote. You can at any time do live audio and visual streaming of both the House and the Senate floor sessions, and you can also do that through the committee as well. So look for that on the website, and I'll show the website here in a couple minutes so you kind of have an idea what that looks like. So if the bill went to it was going to be amended, it would go to the committee of the whole, and the committee of the whole is the entire body of the chamber, and they will not be in an official session. They'll be in, again, the committee of the whole, which is a committee per se, and they will do the amendments there. The amendments is a very different process than you'll hear in other places too. Amendments are taken based on the time that they were filed with the appropriate person. And so if your amendment is last on the list and they've already amended something in that section of the bill, your amendment will never be heard. And the amendments are never published unless they are passed by the committee. So as another housekeeping type thing, Lieutenant Governor presides over the Senate, and the Speaker of the House presides over the House of Representatives. Okay, pop quiz again. True or false? At end of session, haikus are fashionable for House presenters. Now, if you think I've said that very weird, it's because I tried as hard as I could to make a haiku out of that. So I am not a poet, and I know it, but true or false? Do they speak in haikus at the end of session in the House? Anybody? True, I see. Hopefully that was for this one. Anybody else? Gypsy says yes. That is correct. It is very funny to listen to. So you would not know it, but they are actually pretty witty on the floor sometimes. And, you know, sometimes they get a little snarky, which is kind of fun too sometimes. But at the end, I mean, they do have a lot of fun on the floor. They're very formal, but in the end, even Betsy Russell, who writes Eye on Boise, and if you don't know that blog, it's very good to read during legislative session. She'll start writing some haikus at the end too, just to participate in the fun. Okay, so we passed our bill through both houses, right? So now it goes up to the governor. The governor has three options. He can either A, sign the bill into law, and he has to do that within 5 days. He can veto the bill, and both houses would have to overcome the veto with 2/3 of the members present, or he cannot sign the bill and allow it to become law without his signature. Now, over the last couple of years, there's been a little bit of controversy over when the legislature adjourns. So if the legislature adjourns, the governor then has 10 days to sign the bill. Well, a couple years ago, he vetoed a bill after the legislature adjourned, and it was one that they felt really strongly about. So now these last couple of years, you'll see the legislature hanging around until they know that all the controversial bills have been either signed or vetoed by the governor, so they can do something about it if it's vetoed. And then unless there is an emergency clause in the bills, Most bills will go into effect July 1 of that year. All right, next question. We did well on the last one. When speaking about the governor from the floor, and that'll be on the floor of the Senate or the House, legislators refer to him as A, governor, B, Brad, C, Governor Little, or D, the gentleman on the second floor. We got one answer in there. Gypsy says D, the gentleman on the second floor. Anybody else? It is, survey says, D, the gentleman on the second floor. So also, if you are a House member, you will refer to other people on the floor as your fellow legislators and representatives as the legislator from District 1, the legislator from District 4, or the representative from District 5, those types of things, so that people are never referred to by name. Okay, hierarchy of state documents. Oh my gosh, could I come up with a more boring slide? Whew, probably not. A lot of debate you will hear about by legislators is around these documents. So you have your Constitution, right? So we all know our Constitution is at the very, very top. We have statute, which is Idaho code. We have our administrative rules, and this is where we start getting a lot of rubs in with the legislature, and then policy, procedures, and guidelines. And it really has to do with who has authority and why they have authority. So in statute, the legislature has given away a little bit of their authority through the administrative rules process. And they are basically, they are rules that have the force and effect of law. And we like them because they offer more opportunity for public involvement typically. So that takes about a year to get a rule to go through the process. And it depends on the type of rule, and I won't go into that of whether or not how they get approved by the legislature. But you'll see a lot of the legislators say, we don't like this rules process. We think we should have more of a say. We think we should have more of an opportunity to reject rules. So when you start hearing about administrative rules, and it's not talked a lot about, but it's a very important part of the process, that the last couple of years, the legislature has kind of held up approving the rules, and they have had to go into a temporary approval through the governor's office every year for the last couple of years because they stopped approving them about 2 years ago. And these rules can be things like how your driver's license is, going through the driver's license procedures, or rules about how your assisted living centers are regulated, those types of things. So this is a process that if you're interested in policy at all, you need to pay a little bit more attention to, because there's a lot of fights around those administrative rules. All right, pop question, pop quiz, choose the best answer. When does the Idaho legislature convene each year? Is it per the Constitution, where it says the second Monday of January each year? Is it B, at the 12 o'clock hour on Monday or nearest the 9th day in January? Or C, is it January 11th? Any idea? No guesses. This is kind of a hard one because it's B, at the 12 o'clock hour on Monday, the nearest the 9th day in January, which next year in 2022 is January 11th, Monday. But this was changed in 1970. The actual law does state, the Constitution does say the second Monday of January each year, but it also says unless a different day has been appointed by law. And by law, the legislature changed it to that second one at the hour of 12 o'clock on Monday, the nearest the day of 9th of January. So when you look to when the next legislative session starts, you'll look to there. The other thing that's kind of complicated in here is when they sine die. This has never been an issue until this last year. Of sine die means without days. So at the end of session, they'll say we've sine died and we're going home for the year, and basically saying we've adjourned. Well, this last year they decided they weren't going to sine die. The House did. The Senate sine died. So there's a lot of controversy. Did they or did they not adjourn for the year? So they have since decided as of last week that they are going to come back into session November 15th, where they're going to actually look at the vaccination mandates and the ethics complaint against Representative Giddings. So what's the Idaho political makeup? This is so important in our state. If you want to have any thought at all about doing anything with the legislative process, you need to know who your state is. So you look on this map, obviously, I think most of us know we have a red state, but how red is it? So our Senate has 80% Republicans and 83% in the House. Obviously, we only have one governor, so it's 100% Republican. That's a pretty red state. Across the nation, if you move to a different state or do any kind of business in other states, you kind of get an idea of where the rest of them are. And if you follow elections at all, you see a lot of these red, blue states. The purple ones are a mixed, where they might have a Republican governor and a Democratic legislature, or maybe the two houses in their legislature are mixed. So everyone wants to know, well, who are my legislators? Well, right now you can look it up online, but right now redistricting is happening. So your legislative districts are going to be redrawn, and it will, no idea how that's going to end up. So stay tuned. We will find out hopefully in the next couple months of who your legislators may be and who's going to be running in them. And lastly, I just want to show you the legislative website. So here is what the Idaho Legislature website looks like. I will show you a couple things in here. First of all, who my legislator is. Let me pull up the little laser pointer. I'm not sure if that'll work on my thing. Let me look one more time. Can I do that? Nope. Okay, so here. So right here, who's my legislator? If you click on this, you can check. If you go to legislative sessions, you click on that. You will see you can look up any bill number. You can look it up by subject, and you can look it up by session. So here you can kind of scroll through, find what session you're in, and then go to the bill number from there. If you come back to the main page, and you can always get to the main page by this dome right here, you can look at what's happening coming up. So these are some opportunities for jobs. This is what we talked about where the House and Senate, the House recessed, the Senate adjourned sine die. And these are all the special meetings that are coming up. So when we talked about those reinforcement of the legislative districts, these are all the meetings for that. We have a property tax committee meeting coming up, legislative council, November 12th. During session, in this area, you can see, you can click on links to all the agendas that are happening for the committees. And you can find that too in this committee here. You can find out more in the House and Senate here. You can go to legislative publications here. And if you ever want to watch anything through Idaho in session, you can come here. You can look at the legislature. You can look at the governor. You can look at judiciary. You can look at all the committees. And then you can do it by room number too. So that's how you can find things during the session. From there, I just want to touch on one last thing. Why does all this make a difference to you? This is not a pop quiz. You don't have to answer it, but it's something I want you to think about. You have to know how it happens in order to change what happens. You can volunteer with any organization, including ours, that surround sound to the legislature makes a difference, especially if you're their constituent, you live within their district. So letters to the editor. If you follow any of the organizations, we all have advocacy alerts telling you, hey, this bill is coming in, contact your legislator. Social media is big. Let them know how you feel about bills. Be nice though. Don't be the negative person, because they don't they don't like that, don't look at it. And a lot of times you'll push them the opposite direction. So be nice, give personal stories. And then you can always contact the media too, to talk about whatever, give them stories about why some kind of legislation is important. So with that was a quick overview of a very kind of dry subject. Hopefully it wasn't too bad, but I will stop for any questions at the end here. I'll answer anything that I know, and I'll try to answer things I don't know just for fun. So do I have any questions?
You do not have any questions.
That means I was a fantastic teacher, right?
Yeah, that was actually a very informative presentation. I get a little frustrated when I find out that they can just change what people voted for. You know, that to me is a little disquieting in a way. Anybody else have any comments?
Yeah, I'd love to hear, like, even if you don't have a question, we'd love to hear your comments. What do you think about our legislative process in Idaho?
Well, you've got one from Karen who said you did a really great job.
Thank you.
So that's kind of nice, isn't it?
All right, nobody wants to go out on a limb and ask a question or make fun comments about the legislature. The best thing, well, not the best thing, but a lot of fun. City Club does a kind of a wrap up of the legislative session where they have a few of the journalists that cover the legislative session, and they do this really fun, snarky type recap of the legislative session, and it's always fun if you have an opportunity to ever listen to that. And they air it on public radio too. It's really fun because they really get to the meat of issues in a really fun and snarky way. So fun.
And you've got comments, Francois, that talk about how great you did, and Chris said something about the process appears to exclude citizen participation, and that's, I think, was my frustration about the whole thing.
Well, I would say it does and it doesn't. So, I mean, we have a representative government, right? So our elected officials are there to represent us. So we do have access to our legislators in that, they live in our district. So we can go talk to them, we can email them, we can, and we can present and testify to the committees. Yes. What is not as great is that transparency of knowing what's going on, giving a timely notice. The property tax bill that happened last year, it was presented in the Ways and Means Committee and printed, went to the floor, went back to the committee within 2 hours. So it's a long bill. There wasn't very much opportunity for, lobbyists or organizations or just the general public to even look at the bill, let alone read it and come up with an opinion about it. We were on the spot and was able to testify in regard to the circuit breaker issue that was part of that bill, but there was only a couple of us because it happened so quickly and the process is not very transparent. But if you create good relationships with your legislators, then there is that opportunity for public involvement. There's a lot of public involvement in, like I said, the rules process. But in the end, it's really that connection with your local legislator that is a way to get your involvement in there.
Well, thank you very, very much. That was very, very informative. You did a great job. Does anybody have any other comments? Oh, you need to look at some of the comments. Chris says the legislators and the governor sounds like they are the stumbling blocks, and I think that's probably true.
It can be, But I will, let me say one thing in defense of the legislature. So a lot of what we see as the public are the controversial bills, and the ones that do stumble along the way, the ones that have a lot of public testimony. The public feels that they didn't get their voices heard. But there are hundreds of bills that go through the legislative process, and a lot of them aren't controversial. A lot of them are ones that, I mean, that are needed. They have a lot of stakeholders behind it. The legislature doesn't really like to hear bills that all the stakeholders weren't involved in. So they will typically ask, who was at the table crafting the legislation, who, what opposition there might be. And if all the stakeholders aren't on the same page, they don't typically move the bill on, because not everybody is agreeing to what that change is. So there is a lot of it. And I think a lot of us tend to get that kind of that negative taste based on the minority of the bills that really get hung up and have that public outcry. But do hold true that they are doing their jobs for the most part. There are some detractors, but there's a lot of good legislation that also goes through.
Yeah, that's true. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Remember, there's other classes coming up for the next week, and then we're finished with the fall semester. Thanks, Francois.
Thank you.